Hello again and welcome to The Luxury of Choice, a B2B sales and business skills podcast brought to you by the training team of George James Limited. My name is Steve Vaughan. I'm a senior sales trainer at George James, as well as being the host and producer of this podcast. Once again, I'm joining my two colleagues, Jonathan Cooper and Pru Layton. So guys, how are things? How's your week been? One of you?
We're being polite today, Steve. I've had a really good week, home base this week, so no travel.
Okay.
That's good. But really looking forward to the rain stopping. Sorry to talk about the weather.
Oh, I've started building an ark in my garden, I think. It's been horrendous, isn't it? Yeah, non-stop. Yeah. How about you, Jonathan?
Yeah, had a great week. Just come off the back of a great call with the team. Lots going on, so that's always good. So and all good stuff. So really good week actually.
Fantastic,
great week.
yeah.
Yep. Thank you.
Good. Me too. I've had a kind of sorting out kind of week because I'm about to do some travelling, as you know. In fact, I'll be probably editing this podcast while I'm travelling. I'm off to the States for a couple of weeks for a bit of recreation, but also a bit of business. I'll be at the PitCon conference. Looking forward to seeing some of our customers and some of our prospects at that event. Yeah, wasn't it just? So today, what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about how do we get through to key decision makers. So how do we get to meet or at least have a conversation with people that can really make a difference, those big, important individuals in our customers, in our prospects? How do we get through to them? What kind of conversations do we need to have when we do get through to them? And what are the things we need to think about? So let's start right from the start. And I'm going to start with you, Pru. Why do we need to see key decision makers? Why can't we just see the people that we normally see, the guys in the white coat?
Well, I think you'll find the term you use, there's a bit of a clue there, Steve. They're called key decision makers for a really obvious reason. If you're in sales and you want a decision, you clearly need to engage with those folk that can make decisions. Sure. And of course, we have to engage with influencers and people who can give their opinion to these key decision makers. But at some point, and earlier rather than later, we need to know who the key decision makers is and work out how to actually have a conversation with them and to meet them and engage with them.
Interesting, yeah. And you said earlier rather than later. So what did you mean by that?
Well, I think sometimes, and I'm calling on my own experience, you're having a really good progressing a project really well, things are going really well, and sometimes it comes to a bit of a halt. There's lots of enthusiasm, people are very happy with what you're showing, and it stops. And often it's stopped because the people that you're engaged with have gone as far as they can in terms of commitment, and there's somebody else. At which point you get a bit desperate, actually. So you get desperate because you've already talking to your manager about how's that project progressing, and also you've built such a relationship or rapport with the people that you're speaking to, you can often feel that going above them is somehow disregarding or causing offence in your engagement with them. So if we try and do it later, it can often be, hey, we're kind of past you now. Could we speak to somebody more important? So I think if we do it earlier and include everybody who either influences or makes a decision, it's much more comfortable and normal business, I would say.
Yeah, great points. Yeah. So Jonathan, where in an organisation will these kind of people be based? I don't mean geographically, but in terms of the structure of the organisation, what kind of departments are we talking about? What kind of roles, responsibilities would we be talking about?
Yeah, and Steve, I will answer that in just a moment, but I just wanted to roll back to something Pru said, because if I'm brutally honest with myself, it's, why, if I ask the question to anyone who's listening, why do you lose orders? Okay, very easy to say, the product didn't have this, specific capability, price, okay, delivery. There could be, easy to blame something else. But if I truly reflect on my performance, I know why I've lost orders. I've talked to the wrong people at the wrong time about the wrong thing. So finding the right people to speak to at the right time about the right thing is just absolutely crucial in all of this. And,
thanks for making that point. That's a really important point.
And I love Pru's, point about aiming high. And just before we move on to that next question, I have to say, I think somebody taught me a great expression years ago. You never get referred up the organisation, but you do get referred down it, right? So I think where you start is really important. And I would just give two quick scenarios. One is, where you've been invited in. So a scientist has approached you, you've been invited in. I think perhaps it gives you a little less immediate freedom, because you have a duty there, to be respectful and initially speak with that person. I think then I would go back to the comments Pru made about keeping, a wider view of potentially the people at the get-go who could be really important in this decision. But I think the other one is where you approach an account or an organisation, and there's no first contact found you. You have the opportunity to find a way in, and I think that's where it takes this courage to aim high, and aim high. Step back, all sorts of ways we potentially could do that, which I'm sure we might touch upon, on this podcast. So, I'm sorry I didn't answer your first question.
That's some great points.
Sorry, the second question. The first
no,
one
it's fine.
So good.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was better, in fact. So, but to go back to the question, well, so seriously, thanks for those points. But just so we understand, the kind of roles and responsibilities we're talking about, are these people that have got C in front of their job titles typically? Like CEOs, CFOs, CTOs,
the C-suite. Sometimes. They certainly hold a role which has got what I would perhaps call, maybe a little clumsily, but a strategic element to it, right? In terms of strategic thinking, planning, decision making. Often highly placed in the organisation. It could be director, it could be VP, it could be the C-suite. Depends on the size of the organisation to some extent.
Okay,
but
sure.
Absolutely highly placed. Yeah.
So we recognise that we need to aim high then, but how do we do it? Pru, let's come back to you. So we when we want to aim high, have those conversations early on. But if I'm selling scientific equipment, I'm turning up at a pharmaceutical company, I'm probably not going to bang on the door of the CEO's office on the first call, or am I? So how do we do it? What are the things we need to think about in that case?
Well, it's relevant to, there's a relevance, isn't there, Steve, into what you're selling to whom. So as much as we think about what the customer may be interested in from our portfolio, whether it's instrumentation, whether it's software, whether it's reagents, it's also thinking about where that might fit within their organisation and asking questions from our first contact as much about some of the challenges that they're having as to how does that organisation make decisions. And I think sometimes we avoid those conversations. We're really happy to go straight into our comfort zone and go, what are you doing now? What don't you like about it? What would you like to improve? They're all great questions. But maybe not soon enough, we also don't probe or ask questions around how do you make decisions here? Who's involved? What happened last time you did this?
I love that.
Yeah. And I think
that's a great point you said earlier about how do we handle the point where you don't want to sort of be going behind the back of your customer almost, of your primary contact. And I think your scenario there is a great one, which was when you bought something like this last time, who got involved and, what was the process? Is that the kind of thing you mean? Yeah,
very much so. I think, we have to get a number of things right to have a successful outcome. One is to have the right solution for the customer. But as Jonathan said, it's to involve the right people as well. Businesses make decisions in very different ways. They change from business to business, and we should be as curious about how they make a decision and who gets involved as we are curious about their technical requirements.
Got you. What are your thoughts on this, Jonathan?
Yeah, just completely, as usual, completely aligned with Pru on this one. I always think when we approach people at these more senior levels in organisations that we do need a compelling reason to speak to them. I think putting ourselves in their shoes and looking at the business from their perspective, how do we help them in some way? Now, I appreciate that there are maybe some products and services that the listeners sell that, perhaps, doesn't always require sort of that high level contact. But I suspect for many of the listeners, it probably does. Okay, at some point, right, for some of their sales, during their fiscal year. So thinking about and having a compelling reason for speaking to people, and those compelling reasons, if you move away from the laboratory, will be far more strategic in terms of them, maybe your solution will help increase their competitiveness. Maybe it helps them make money. Maybe it saves them money. It increases efficiency in some way, improves a process in some way. For some organizations, it's amazing what information is actually available that helps you orientate this conversation. You go to websites. It's amazing what you can find in terms of, what do the goals of the overall organization look like? It starts to give you some really good clues about types of conversations that you may need to have that are beyond just the science, the clinical, the engineering, etc., depending on what you are selling. So, I do think that compelling reason, you have to have a compelling reason that will immediately engage somebody. And it's amazing who will actually talk to you. It really is. I always get surprised. They want to talk to me. Wow. Great.
So I guess if we are going to have a meeting with a very senior person or a very influential person, a key decision maker in one of our customers, Pru, we've got to be prepared, haven't we? We can't just walk in there and say, hey, I'm Steve, you need to talk to me. We've got to perhaps give a bit more thought. So what kind of things do we need to perhaps think about in terms of preparation?
I think it's understanding what their role is in the organisation. And if we've been curious early enough to understand why they're involved and how they've made decisions previously, we can start to understand what's of interest to them. And it often means that we can't rely on our amazing product and application knowledge, which might be why we avoid speaking to these people. Just a thought.
Right.
Maybe we do. Because we're going to have to talk about things that are wider ranging within the organisation they work in, and be prepared to have a good level of conversation and preparation around what they care about. Jonathan's right. There is so much information available there. It's just we may have to go to a different place to find that information. Where are we going to go and look for that information? And it's often in the public domain. What is the plan for the business? Who are their competitors? Are they growing? Are they defending? Are they struggling for funding? And all of those things are often available if we look at it, and can be the start of the conversation with somebody who has less of a technical input and more of a business impact input into where they're going to make their investments.
Absolutely. Whenever I'm training on this, I always say to the guys I'm training, go and look at your customer's website, particularly if it's a commercial organisation, and there'll be something on there that says for investors or words to that effect, and they'll have their prospectus trying to tell their shareholders what's going on with the business. And that's a great place to find out this kind of stuff, isn't it, really, Jonathan? Do you think?
Yeah. Most of the investor relations pages I go to, the CEO statement or, highly placed executives within the business will often lay out beautifully what their strategy is for the future. So everything that organization does has to align with that in some way, right the way down through the organization. Obviously, inverted commas, the more important the purchase they're making, perhaps the more visible the alignment that you will see. But I think understanding that helps you frame so much of what you ultimately end up talking about with the customer. And I think having a knowledge and understanding of that strategy just leaves you, so well placed. If you happen to bump into one of these people in the corridor at a meeting because they decide to attend one, right, and it just leaves you so well placed. So there's some fantastic information out there. I think in academia as well as industrial, for sure, definitely.
No, that's a good point. I don't think this is just purely for financial, or commercial organisations, should I say. Academia, universities have strategy. Hospitals have strategy where they want to be, where they want the business, their organisation to go, and we shouldn't just fall into the trap of just assuming because it's not for profit that they still don't have a strategic direction and a goal. In fact, probably more so, if anything. Let's go back to the how then. So we've talked about the what, we talked a little bit about the why, but the how. How do we get to see these people? What's the process, Pru? What's a good way of doing it?
Well, I think the first thing I go back to, have a plan to do it as early as you can. So as much as we have a plan to win the business in terms of technically how can we position our product best, who are our competitors, it's also have a plan to work out how you're going to get to and engage with the decision makers and recruit a bit of support inside the organisation with the people that you're speaking to already. If you haven't been able to approach at a high level and you're moving up the decision-making chain, you definitely need advice, support from the people that you're already engaged with. Because if they are convinced of your solution, if they're convinced of you're a good solution for them, it's in their interest as well to help you get there. So I think just having a plan, then doing your research, And asking for the appointment, it's like many things in sales. Sometimes the barrier's in our head, to be perfectly honest. We know that we have to, but we just don't ask.
That's right.
So have the courage to ask and say, how am I going to get to support what you want with this person? Can you help me? And I think using the word help is such an emotive word in many parts of being a successful salesperson. As human beings, when someone asks for help, we want to help. So just do it.
Absolutely. Yeah, great points. And I think, as you said, Jonathan, it's almost like we need a fan, or we need somebody on our side in the organisation to help get to these people.
Yeah. And just before I sort of come to that, I would say that I think one of the things that I learned in my many years of selling is that the number of times I've met a highly placed individual, I think the thing that struck me most is just how nice they are, right? And if you're prepared and are prepared to have the conversation with them that they would like to have, right? Because for them it's about achieving their goals, okay, executing the strategy effectively to do that through their team. If you're prepared to have that conversation, it doesn't matter how old you are, how much experience you have. If you are prepared, it's amazing who will talk to you. So I think that is definitely a point that I would make here. Okay, and Pru's so right.
Thanks for making that.
She's so right. It's amazing sometimes. Pick up the phone, right, and call people. It's extraordinary. But again, it's that compelling reason to engage with you. Yeah, definitely.
And of course, there was lots of good tips on our previous podcast from the telephone assassin on how to do that.
If
you haven't caught that one, guys, listen to the previous show.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think, and I'm sure Pru will add something here, but I think in terms of, I wouldn't say I'm inherently lazy, but when I'm trying to win a sale and ultimately win an account, I try to do it in the easiest way possible. Why make it more difficult than it needs to be? I think pretty much from the day I started selling, I was always looking for those person that would sponsor me. Okay, they're called all sorts of things. Okay. I've heard, champion, coach, advocate, sponsor. I know those words are different, but I think most people mean them in the same way. That here is somebody that's very credible in the organisation, can get you some great introductions, and because they're credible as well, and when you meet them, they're credible too. So they can take you places. And I've always found having a sponsor or even a network of sponsors in the accounts that I've worked with tremendously powerful. It's a great concept. It helps you enormously. Navigate your way to the deal ultimately.
So they're the kind of people who would say things to us in quotes. If I was you, this is who I'd be speaking to. If I was you, I'd be doing this.
Yes.
Is that, that's what we mean. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Pru's favourite line is, "Would you help me?" Mine is, "Could I have some advice, please?" So if any of your listeners out there and I'm selling to you and I ask for your advice, you know why. So, give them the secret away.
Completely. And again, none of this is a script. It's doing things in your own way. And we've said before on this podcast, whenever somebody says thank you, that's a great time to say, "You're welcome. Can you help me?"
Yeah.
Any more thoughts on this, Pru?
I think go back to the idea. It's like one of our previous podcasts when we talked about cold calling or picking up the phone. Half the barriers are in our head, and I think it's the same when trying to get to people who have C in front of their title or people who really hold the decision-making power. You don't know until you try. And it's like many, many things in sales. We sort of have to get over ourselves and just say, it's part of what I have to do. And Jonathan, you're right. I've often found people whose name I've seen on an organogram that have filled me with a little bit of trepidation about how senior they are. And when you actually get to meet them, they're often great people to meet. I mean, I'm going to use a personal example. I was part of an acquisition once, and on an organogram, what I saw was that the new head of the organisation was someone called Steve Vaughan. And I was like,
gosh. Oh, you don't want to deal with him.
And he looked very senior, and I was like, I wonder what he's like. And
I was a real tight, real horrible, nasty, vile. No, I wasn't. I couldn't do that if I tried.
Well, the first time we actually met Steve, he gave me a gift. It was a suitcase. But anyway, and so you have to reflect on the times in your life when you have met very senior people and they turn out to be great. And I think that's more often the case, to be honest.
Yeah, great point. And often they get those roles not because they've got fantastic. Of course, they have fantastic qualifications and experience, but they've also got the personality and the charisma almost to have the ability to interact with people at that level. Jonathan, one of the things I used to say before we pass over back to you, Jonathan, what I often say in my training is, if you were selling to your own company, how would you do it? So if you were, I often use computers as an example because people can relate to that. If I was trying to sell the whole Salesforce, a whole new range of computers, how would I do it? Yeah, I'd talk to IT about, this particular button does this. Some stage, I'm going to have a conversation with your board or your senior people anyway about return on investment. So is that a good way of looking at it, Jonathan?
Yeah, as I was taught, and I think, goodness me, I had my first lesson on this probably in about 1984 or 85. Organisations make decisions, really just based on, two factors fundamentally. The return on investment, okay, and your deal is your opportunity, your business case, your solution is often competing with many others. And so it's made on either return on investment or, the impact that it actually will have, on the organisation in some way, shape or form. I don't think I've rarely seen anything beyond those two things at the end of the day. Again, depends on the type of organisation you're selling to. But then again, it's another critical reason for engaging at high levels, because if you don't understand, for instance, the strategic importance of your opportunity, very easy to meet some amazingly enthusiastic clinicians, scientists, engineers who think their project is the only game in town. And actually it's not. There's many, many, many other considerations. And so getting a clearer view of what those considerations are and where your project sits strategically in the sort of the list of likely, future purchases and, where they'll invest the cash at the end of the day, it's just fundamental to understand, especially if you have to forecast.
No, completely. Yeah, well, we do, of course.
We do, exactly.
And without making this a whole training program on strategic selling, because that's a whole, big program in its own right, just going back to what you said, Jonathan, I want to ask Pru this question, but you said about having somebody who's on our side who wants to be, helping us. Often it could be the other way around as well, though. So I'm thinking about times in my career where I was selling, say, automation systems or robotics or whatever. Potentially, and this is stretching the point, but potentially it could be putting somebody out of work or at least taking responsibility away from people. So they may not be on our side. In fact, they may be possibly hostile to what we're trying to sell. So how do we handle that one, Pru, in terms of going to the senior person? What are your thoughts on that one?
It is. I think it's often a challenge when what you're offering is a high level of automation or taking out potentially decision-making group and doing things in a more automated way. There can be huge sensitivity around who you have that conversation with. But there will be somebody in the business whose role it is to make those kind of decisions. So if you do realise or recognise that there's going to be a challenge for the people that you're currently engaged with, it's already telling you, don't have those conversations with them. There's somebody in this organisation who is interested in having this conversation. And so be careful about who you have it, but please don't avoid it, because you might avoid it because you don't want to have that conversation. But somebody from one of your competitors may well be having that conversation.
Absolutely.
And if the business has decided or the department have decided that's the way they're going, it's not you that's going to push them to it. You're just a range of options that they're considering. So don't avoid it.
And it's not personalised business. Yeah. I can see you nodding, Jonathan. What are your thoughts on that one? Yeah.
Well, I go back to, I think it was the January one of the early January podcasts when we were talking about resolutions for 2024. What did Pru talk about? Write down a list of those people that you don't really want to speak to. I think I may have paraphrased it slightly, Pru. Okay, those conversations that you don't really want to have, you have to go and have them. Okay, you have to go and have those conversations. Just an observation I've made, when I've seen, for instance, automation brought into a lab, actually, rather than sort of threaten people's roles, often it's enabled people to actually use their time in different ways, and often, in a more productive way, actually. So I don't know what your experiences are here, but sometimes I've almost felt like a little bit part of the management team in really getting these messages across to the people in those labs. Once you've had those difficult conversations, you need to be careful, obviously. But it's a good one, and it comes back to your point, Steve, that you made just to kick this little bit off about who could stop the sale. We talk about who can make the sale, but I think every salesperson should always ask themselves who could stop it. And here's a classic case. There's many more, of course, we could talk about.
You make a great point about allowing people to do more productive work. I was doing some training for a company before Christmas, and I won't obviously name them, but one of the products they're bringing into the market, it's a new product, is automated sample prep. And the big sales benefit really for their customers isn't we're going to fire a load of people. It's actually all those really highly qualified people that we've hired with first degrees or even second degrees can start doing things that are more appropriate for those qualifications rather than fairly routine sample prep stuff. So I think it's pitching it to the audience that you're talking to, I guess, Pru, really, isn't it? And understanding what's important to them. Yeah.
Always think about, what's important to them, not what's important to you and what you want to get across. Clearly, there are some things you want to get across, but different audiences for different things, and recognise that the role that the person has, how they make decisions, what their input's going to be, and manage the conversation appropriately.
Yeah, great point. So guys, any final thoughts on getting through to the key decision maker? Any more final nuggets before we sort of wrap up this week's show? You, Jonathan, anything you can think of that we've missed?
No, I don't think specifically missed, but a point that I would reinforce. Just look, it's very personal, this, but where have I had most success? Finding a sponsor or sponsors, right? In terms of getting in front of the right people at the right time. They've been great. They've also been brilliant at helping me dealing with, somebody I always refer to as the saboteur, the person that definitely doesn't want me in. Probably sponsored the competition. Fair enough. Okay. That's the way it is.
Yeah.
That for me would be a very powerful piece of advice I would give everyone. Find a sponsor. And I think this podcast has probably helped you find out even how to recruit them. You ask for help or you ask for advice. Hopefully. And as soon as they do that, there's your sponsor, okay? But look after the balance of the relationship, I would say, okay? Make sure that stays in balance. Completely. You can't just take, you have to give as well, and find a way to do that.
Absolutely. Great point. And you, Pru?
I just think it's like, as part of your plan to position the right product, solution or whatever, part of your plan and strategy to win business is to also map the decision makers with as much purpose as you work out about technically what they want. Make it part of the first thing that you want to do.
Great point. And my final point on this really would be, if we are going to have those conversations, we should be having those conversations with these key decision makers, and we're going to prepare conversations around things like return on investment or, efficiency gains or cost reductions, make sure you've got your proof available for that, because otherwise it's just words. Yes, ours is more efficient. Yes, ours will save you money. Yes, ours will improve, throughput. Yes. Yep. But can you prove it? Otherwise, it's just words. Yeah.
Yep.
Absolutely.
There's a ton of stuff I could say around that, Steve, but I won't.
Well, that's a whole other podcast, I think. Really, think so. When we're looking at objection handling and things, which is one I know that we're planning to do. So, great, guys, thanks very much for your time again, as always. Just a reminder to the listener that we are welcoming questions. We had some great questions for the show the last time. We'd like some more. So if you'd like to ask any of us a question or even challenge us on some of the points that we made, we'd love to hear from you.
Definitely.
You can contact us directly through any of our LinkedIn accounts. If you've got our phone numbers, emails, of course, just contact us directly. Or there is an email address for the show, which is just podcast, capital P, at georgejames-training.com. That's podcast, capital P, at georgejames-training.com. Don't forget to subscribe to the show, because that means you'll get it a little bit early. The show goes out on Sunday evening, and the subscribers will get it a little bit earlier. So do subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify as well, or any other app where you can subscribe. And do, of course, give us a review. Reviews help us in lots of strange ways. So if you do have a chance to give us a review on either Apple or Spotify, that will be wonderful. I'll be back again in 2 weeks' time with another guest, which I'm sure you'll find of interest. But in the meantime, happy sailing out there, and we talk to you soon.